Hello, I'm Bailey Wilcock from Holy Nativity Church in the Diocese of Leeds in the urban estate of Mixington and Illingworth. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, I'm Bishop Philip and I'm the Bishop of Burnley in the wonderful Diocese of Blackburn, serving Lancashire.
Wonderful, and we're going to have a little conversation about estates ministry and how we can make it a little bit more accessible to people from estates, and yeah, be a really good conversation, I hope.
I hope so.
Wonderful. So, I'll start you off by the first question, and it'll be, tell me what your goal is for EETG and how do you plan on achieving it?
So EETG is the Estates Evangelism Task Group, and it's a Church of England body that works with all sorts of partners, and we have a very, very simple vision actually, which is to have a loving, serving, worshipping Christian community on every single significant estate in the country. Because over the last 20-30 years, the Church of England has slowly been withdrawing from many urban areas. Many estates churches have been shut down, and many estates there's simply no Christian community to bear witness to the gospel. And that strikes me as an absolute disaster, because if we're not proclaiming good news to the poor, we're not doing what Jesus told us. If we abandon the poor, we abandon God. And if we're serious about reclaiming a nation for Christ, that's going to start in our poorest and most marginalised areas. So ETG is all about renewing church life on those estates. So we want to encourage churches on estates and really give real support to their leadership. And we want to encourage denominations and dioceses to plant back onto those estates that we've walked away from or never been present on, so that in every state in the country there's a church which is good news as they love and serve the people of that estate.
How do you plan on getting the churches to do that and implement estates churches within their communities?
So it's a huge task, obviously. It's a big undertaking. It involves turning around a great oil tanker. And how will we do it? It requires partnership. So it'll require churches of different denominations working together. It'll mean other sort of groups, charities and other partners that we work with, also uniting around this goal. It will take imagination, because what does a church look like? A church doesn't have to be a full-time vicar and a building and a vicarage. A church is a group of people gathered together for word and sacrament. So what that looks like and how it's led can be very different in very different places. But above all, it just takes massive, massive trust in God and in the power of the gospel. And if we're not prepared to let go and trust God in all this, we just won't get anywhere. But I think what we're seeing around the country is some really beautiful new churches cropping up. Some are led by priests, some are lay-led. Some have got buildings, some haven't. But many of them are fragile, but beautifully fragile. But we're seeing, groups of local people, local estates people, gathering together, learning what it means to be a Christian, and as they do so, learning what it means to be human.
What is your definition of evangelism?
My definition, there's a beautiful definition of evangelism, which was written by the last Pope, Pope Benedict XVI. And he talks about evangelism as teaching people the art of living. And I think evangelism can have a bad name, as if we're sort of hammering some bolt-on extra, which is Jesus Christ, to their lives. But it isn't. What Jesus offers is life in all its fullness. Jesus offers a life in all its fullness that begins now, because we discover our humanity in relationship with him. Jesus offers a life in all its fullness lived in community, because in the family of the church we can grow together and discover what we are. Jesus offers us purpose to our lives, because he has a plan for us. And Jesus offers us a future, because he's died and risen again to set us free. The Christian life is about the offering of our whole selves to Jesus and the discovery of our whole selves. So it's about coming fully alive. So evangelism is those processes by which we help people to come fully alive in Jesus Christ. And there's as many approaches to evangelism as there are churches and as there are Christians. But a lot of it is about relationship. It's about getting to know people. It's about understanding their lives, about wanting the best for them. It's about serving and allowing opportunities to serve. And the context of that networks of relationships, allowing people to discover who Jesus is and so who they are.
How do we tell churches that evangelism's not getting bums on seats, but actually helping people to build a close relationship with God?
I think evangelism, though, is about getting bums on seats. Because the thing about bums is they're attached to human beings, and human beings are in need of salvation in Christ. So I'm into growth in every possible way. I love to see churches grow in breadth as people become richer disciples of Jesus Christ. I love to see them grow in service as they found new ways of reaching out into their community. And I love to see them grow in size. Because as churches grow in size, that means more and more people are finding life in Jesus Christ. And I think churches quickly discover, I think evangelism begins with one's own personal relationship with Jesus Christ. If it's simply about propping up an institution, that's not going to motivate anyone. If our evangelism is motivated by anxiety because we want to keep the church open or prop up the institution, that's not going to attract anyone. Evangelism flows from our own relationship with God in Jesus Christ. So when we know Jesus as Lord, and when we discover what it really means to be loved by him, that's when we're desperate for other people to know him. So actually, if you want to grow a church, the best way is first of all to seek your own deeper conversion to Christ. If you want to grow a congregation, the first way is to, even if there's only 8-10 people, call those people to a deeper joy in the gospel and a deeper joy in knowing Jesus Christ. Because from that, when people truly come alive to Christ, then any church can grow.
Mixenden, the estate that I'm from, it's a very individual place. The people turn to the church for guidance, for help, but how can we encourage those people to find a relationship with God when sometimes we aren't giving them what they can hear? They have a different language to what the Church of England are speaking to people. The Church of England's a white middle class place. How can we make it more tailored towards the working class people?
I think for the local church, that's easier for the local church than the Church of England kind of nationally. I think for the local church, it's about a ministry that really, really deeply listens. The best thing local churches can do is just listen. Remember when I was working in a parish in Camden Town, and we had a season where we just listened to our community. It wasn't formal consultation meetings. We just said to everybody, this week and next week, go and find people, the people you work with, the people you live next to, and ask them 2 questions. Say, what gives you joy about living in this area, and what's giving you grief? And let's see what we hear. And it's fascinating what we learned about our area. Fascinating also how that impacted the way I preached and taught. Because I kind of, came closer to what was going on. So I think we really need to drill down and listen to our communities. And often even estate churches can become quite distanced from their community. So it starts with really deep listening to context. And then it's about answering actually the questions on people's hearts. Now, what do we see Jesus doing? He very rarely actually proclaims the gospel. He asks people questions. And then he shows how the kingdom is relevant to their lives. And I think that's what we need to do. Ask questions and then actually answer the questions we hear rather than the ones we want to answer. And I think with that kind of intentional listening, local churches can really start to make a difference. It's very, very, very long work. Let's not expect instant results on our estates. As we heard in this conference we've just been to, it takes a generation to transform a generation. But I think that deep listening to context and really answering the right questions is really important. Your bigger question, how does the Church of England become less middle class? That is a very difficult one to answer indeed. And it's, we're talking major cultural change here. And I think a lot of it is about actually raising up leaders from our estates and our urban areas who can move into significant positions. But to do that, we need to be present in those urban areas in the first place. So if we actually have a church on every estate, if we're raising up leaders in those churches, if we're really listening to what the urban church is saying, then that culture change will start to happen. It's not the middle classes who'll evangelise a nation, it's those who are poor who'll evangelise a nation. And we've got to allow that to happen.
Building on the thing that you said about building up leaders from estates, how can we make that more accessible to them? Because the process itself is quite a hard thing, You're
talking about the process towards ordination.
And exploring that sort of faith with them. How can we make that more accessible to people that are from a working class background and don't have the same things that middle class people do?
So I think first of all there's more to raising up leaders in ordination. I think it begins where local churches are looking at their assets, looking at who God has given them, and thinking, how can we develop these people? And there's some quite interesting experiments going on in my own diocese, for example, a course called Empower, which is helping urban churches to identify their unlikely leaders, then offering them a year of sort of focused formation and teaching about mission and leadership to try and raise up leaders for the local church on the grounds that the people who can best proclaim the gospel to an estate are those from that estate. But I think if that's happening, inevitably people will come with saying, but I think God might be calling me to be a priest, or in whom the church sees that vocation. And there I think we need to look at three things really. First of all, the discernment processes within a diocese. Second, the national discernment framework, which is being radically changed. And it's being changed to be more diverse. And it's being changed, but they've been in close contact with the Estates Evangelism Task Group as they've looked at that framework. And I think it is much, much more diverse and inclusive. But then it's particularly, I think, about the training pathways that people are on. Our theological colleges can feel very much like being sent off to Oxford and Cambridge, very kind of essay heavy. And I think we need to find new ways of forming and releasing people for ordination, where you're not constantly having to write essays, where you're learning in other ways, which some of these leadership pathways like Empower are teaching us. So I think there's quite big questions there to go on asking really about how we form the priests of the future.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for that wonderful insight that you've given us all.
Thank you, Bailey, for your excellent questions.
No problem. Thank you.